three value swatches right now, and intentionally I didn't go all the way to black or all the way to white, just so I have room to go afterwards. But yeah, this is my three values. Middle gray is the canvas color.
Is that based on? I assume that's based on what you're seeing. In front of you?
Somewhat. I mean, you have, because to me, like, exposure is how you look at it. You can make the white to be whiter. You can see the darkest dark to be darker. Depends on how you see it. So I don't think it's actually that important capturing exact value, but it's more of the relationship I wanted to play with.
When you say exposure, you're talking like camera exposure sort of thing.
Yeah, but I does the adjustments, right? So just like the camera, change the exposure to see, brighter part or the darker part, your eyes can do that as well. So for me, it's more about the relationship rather than just capturing exact value.
And here you kind of started overall with your darkest value and you're pulling these whites out. Is there a reason, or is that?
Oh, that's mainly because of the scene where it was mostly dark. And there was one, sort of a highlight on the tip of the table, a corner of the table, that I knew that was the lightest light for me. But in the scene, there aren't many areas close to that value range. So that means I have to actually drop overall value down so that I have room to go with right here, for the highlight.
Yeah. And like right now, it's great because you're working it's almost like abstract painting. It's like I can tell they're chairs, but like the floating thing in space. What are you looking at right now? You're looking at just shape, or?
Yeah, this is a really difficult exercise. We kind of task ourselves to do it just so that we can really try to see the value structure. But it's a really good but also challenging exercise because you really have to try to see the pattern. At least for me, I'm trying to see the pattern. As you can see, I'm almost losing the chair on the right, because if I squint, I don't see the complete silhouette of the chair. Some parts of the chair disappears into the background. And that's kind of fun, you almost have to trust yourself. I'm almost forgetting I'm painting chairs and table. Like, I'm just responding to the light pattern.
No, you had that pattern kind of behind the chair, and you got rid of it now. Oh, there it is. So you're just kind of refining shapes? Is that why?
Yeah, what I was doing was just still, trying to get the overall silhouette of the chair, even within this value structure. So, as you can see in the layers, I have chairs separated from the background, which comes in handy later. So I gotta say, this is still very tricky because you'll see the wall color is actually brighter, but definitely not as bright as the highlight. So I later decided to actually make that value structure to be middle gray, even though it's lighter than some of the middle gray. So, since we're forced to work with three values, you really have to make a decision whether your values, sort of subtle in-between values, belong to the higher key or the lower key. And I'm working on a tabletop right now, which is really fun because as you squint at it, it's actually pretty much the same value as what's behind the tabletop. So you really don't see sort of where the tabletop ends on the other side in space. So this is my best stab at rough overall three value structures. There are definitely adjustments I need to make, but if I squint at it, it falls into somewhat like this to me. Okay, let's paint for final. So the very important thing about this exercise is that you are constantly squinting at what you're painting, as well as your canvas. So that when you squint at it, your value structures will stay within the range that you decided. And of course, if you make adjustment, because you're never perfect, you might have to make adjustment. Maybe the value range that you picked up earlier turned out to be wrong, and you make adjustment. But this forces you to stay very simple with your value structure. I'm just using edges to kind of blending things in, just creating subtle values.
I know I don't start paintings oftentimes like this with just purely 3 values, lasso tool, and cutting out shapes. And we're obviously doing this almost as an exercise. But do you find that it helped you or anything?
I think it helps tremendously. And oftentimes I forget how important it is to stay simple with your value structure, because the more value range you have, there's a tendency to actually start to get very stale, or everything becomes kind of blending into each other, and you're no longer making a sort of this big decision or statement with your values. This is very helpful.
Like start your paintings like this,
yeah.
You think? Like with this kind of simple graphic value structure.
And check this out, I'm actually working on this darkest dark, behind this kind of a sort of a sheet that's over this piano, I believe, behind the table. And, the reason why it looks really dark is, first of all, it's dark, but it also has this kind of a sharp edge. So if you squint at it, it still blends back into the same value range, so make no mistake, it's not like it's another value introduced. It is darker, but it's not much darker. And, I don't know how you do it, Robert, but, for me, I'm constantly fixing my drawing. I oftentimes, I try not to get too caught up in accurate drawing to start with. I try to, give my best, but I constantly fix drawings as I go, because oftentimes as you put down more values and colors, not in this case a color, but as you make your painting go further along, you start to kind of see what's wrong with your drawing too. And I tend to fix as you go.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting because I do tend to draw a lot more in the front end than as I'm noticing. We were getting to watch you paint. Like I noticed, like we do have different approaches a bit. But what's amazing to me is like how abstract you start and how much, as you pull things out, you start to see the picture form together. It's like you could still look over on the left side of the painting and see kind of what the very first value indication was for that chair. And I know now, looking at the big picture, that obviously, as it is right now, it stands out in a way that is not how it will be in the final picture. Mm-hmm. But I could see that you're working from relationship to relationship, whether it's like you set down like the darkest dark, and now the more subtle things are easier to attack and easy for me to see where you're going with it. Mm-hmm. And I think there's something about that, whether it's drawing or values or anything, that I could see that you're working from relationship to relationship. Does that mm-hmm. seem accurate, kind of?
Yeah. The more you have, the more you can sort of reference against, and that's why it is important to have the attitude of like, okay, now I have more information, I can fix that, as opposed to like, oh, I've already painted this area, so I won't touch it, or I'm kind of married to that. Mm-hmm. And obviously, like, you'll know, as you go, as this painting goes further along, the left side, basically, the light was coming from, the soft diffuse light was coming from the right side of the screen, into the scene, and there's a slight value sort of gradation going. And what's interesting, and now I put down the background, the left side of the chair is too bright. You watch, it's actually, I'm constantly making this chair darker and darker and darker.
And I think that's okay, right? Like, I think something that's really important to keep in mind is actually the exercise or the doing of the simplification of values is more important in terms of what we're trying to see and communicate than it is that it matches exactly what it is in the end, yeah. Right? And I think that's like something that's really important to remember, I think, as we're painting stuff, is that, I could see right now that probably overall the chair needs to go darker. But because that's what you set out to do in the beginning, you shouldn't feel that you're a slave to that, right? Like it's there as a building block, as a starting place, and it should change. Because again, like as you said, as you add more relationships and the context becomes clear, it is really all about adjustment.
And also, I think there's something about sort of forcing yourself to try to hit it with fewer strokes or the fewer, tools. Like in this case, fewer values, right? That kind of really forces you to be very immediate with your strokes. Just know, even if you're wrong, your strokes will be much more determined than kind of trying to noodle and trying to figure out like your strokes are kind of indecisive. And a lot of times people ask, how do you get this kind of painterly look? And one thing I always think, good painterly paintings are not because they're just loose or they're just floppy. They actually, like each stroke has its own, like its purpose or something. And I think, Sargent and Zorn and those painters who control their sort of simple strokes so well were able to, put down like very decisive strokes as opposed to just being sloppy or being loose, for the sake of being loose. So this exercise really forces you to at least try your best at the moment.
And now you're playing with a bit of almost atmosphere?
Yeah. Yeah, the haze is definitely something, just the final touch. I don't think it's so subtle that if you squint at it, I don't think actually you see it as much. So that's why you never want to get into these things until later. Like small, tiny highlights. The big highlight, like the big highlight on the corner of the table, that was visible even if I squinted. The small highlights like on the corner of the the back of the chair and stuff like that, if I squinted, I didn't see it, So those things you just want to leave it until the end, But again, at the end of the day, it's all about what you're seeing, If you know how to see it, you can always adjust, you can always practice to make it work. But if you don't know how to see it, fancy techniques can never get to where you want to be.